I want to say a few thank yous before getting to my remarks. First to Johnny and to this wonderful organization, which I think is so important in the conservative movement. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me offer some thoughts and remarks to help kick off this conference. I want to thank our sponsors, Bright News, and also I want to thank Revolver News for sponsoring this conference and also just being a really interesting voice in the conservative movement these days, founded, or at least I think involved with my friend Darren Beatty, who's an important voice in the conservative movement, like so many of the people in this room. So much of, I think, what needs to happen in the conservative movement these days is courage. Courage to respond to the threats and the reactions of the left, courage to stand on principle, courage to offer new ideas to new challenges. And I'm going to talk a little bit later tonight about family policy, and I have to, tell you a little bit of a story, which is the last time that I spoke about family policy in Washington, D.C. was, I think, 3 years ago. And my remarks were picked up by the Washington Post. And one of the arguments that I made in that speech is that we should care about the fact that there aren't enough American families. There aren't enough babies being born in our country. And of course, the Washington Post said that when I said there weren't enough American babies being born, what I must have meant, what I had to mean, is there weren't enough white American babies being born. And it was one of the first introductions in my life to really how vicious the media could be. I'd been criticized by the press before, but when those remarks were interpreted by the Post in that way, I lost business contacts, I lost investors. It actually affected my life materially. And what it made me realize is two things. First of all, courage is really important. And second of all, courage isn't possible without good friends and friendship. And so many of the people in this room, I even looking out at you now, I see so many good friends who have helped me be courageous in this moment in our country's history. It's so necessary and so important. So thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being leaders in this movement that all of us care about so much. So I want to talk just a little bit about this concept of the American dream. And I see this clock staring at me like a ticking time bomb. So I'll try to be short in my remarks. I didn't have too much to drink, so I should be able to keep on time tonight. But the American dream is not about the stuff that I think the media tells us that it's about. It's not about fancy degrees. It's not about best-selling books. It's not about a lot of wealth and a lot of power and a lot of privilege. To me, the American dream is about living a good life in your own country. The American dream of my mamaw, who did not graduate from high school, and the woman who really made me and gave me so many of the opportunities that I've been able to have in my life, she did not care what I did. She did not care where I went to school. She did not care how much money I made. She just wanted me to be a good husband and a good father. She wanted me to be able to provide my kids the things that I didn't have when I was growing up. And I'm proud to say that Mamaw's American dream for me has actually been realized. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I've got a beautiful wife, the love of my life. I've got two beautiful boys. And I think, oh my God, I should have been the statistic. But in this country, in this place of ours, I was able to live my dreams and have some of the same opportunities that Mamaw wanted for me. And I didn't think even when I was a teenager this would happen. I didn't think that I'd be able to build a business in my hometown. I didn't think, most of all, that I would be able to provide my children and my wife the things that I didn't have growing up. That's the American dream that we have to fight for in this country. And I worry a little bit that when people hear that word, the American dream, that phrase, their eyes sort of glaze over. Because the way that it's been taught to by so many establishment Republican politicians is that the American dream is the dream of Mitt Romney. It's private jets, it's fancy businesses, it's a lot of money, but that's not the American dream that most Americans actually occupy. They just want to live a good life in their own country. Now, this is more complicated than it sounds. As all of us know, we care a lot about the American dream, but what does it actually mean? Well, to me, it means two critical categories of things. The first is that it means if you work hard and play by the rules, you can support a middle-class family on a single wage. Good jobs that pay a good wage for people who work hard and play by the rules. That's the first component. And it's that simple thing. It's why we care about our immigration policy, which undercuts the wages of American workers right now. It's why we care about our trade and manufacturing policies, why we don't want the Chinese to build their middle class on the backs of the American middle class, because we want our own people to be able to earn a good wage so long as they work hard and play by the rules. But it's also cultural, and that's where I'm going to focus my remarks tonight, not because it's the only thing that matters, but because I've only got 24 minutes and 52 seconds, and I can only talk about so much. Now, the cultural component of this is that to live a good life in your own country, you have to actually feel respected, and you have to be able to teach your children to honor and love the things that you were taught to honor and love. Now, I think about my mamaw, who did not graduate from high school, as I said earlier. She was not an educated woman by definition, but she knew by name every single battle that General George S. Patton fought and won in North Africa. To the day that she died, she taught me to believe that we came from something proud. We were the people who landed in Normandy and defeated the Nazis in Europe. We were the people who put the first man on the moon. We were the people that defeated the Soviets in Europe. American patriotism to her wasn't just flag waving and 4th of July parades, as important and fun as those things could be. American patriotism was about appreciating where you came from so you could know where you were going. That, to me, is what's at risk in the culture wars that we find ourselves fighting today. The left isn't just criticizing our country. It's not just making us ashamed of where we came from. It's trying to take our very sense of national pride and national purpose away from us, because you can't have one without the other. If you don't know where you came from, you will have no idea where you're going. When they take us away from that sense of pride in our own history, they make us completely unable to direct where we're going to go in the future. That's what this is about. It's not about correcting systemic racism or systemic wrong. It's about making us easier to control. It's about making us ashamed of where we came from. We, the people right in this room, have to fight against it. But I have to be honest with you, the culture war that we fight in this country, I worry that many conservatives, even many conservatives in this room, that we underappreciate the challenge that we face. Because the way the culture war is being fought, it's not just about social pressure. They don't just make you ashamed to believe certain things. They don't just tell you that you're not allowed to teach your children that the founding generation was something to be proud of. What they teach you is that if you dare go astray of progressive orthodoxy, we're going to make you pay. We're going to punish you. We're going to hit you where it counts, which is in your wallet. That is what the culture war is about. Another way of putting it is that the culture war in this country is a class war. And I mean that in two ways. The first way is that it is a war against middle and working class people. You look in the Democrat Party or the Republican Party, the most patriotic people, the best and most devoted to the country, whether they're black, white, whatever party that they're in, it's almost consistently those without a college education. It's the working and middle class people. It's those people who send their children to fight in our wars. It's those people who pay their taxes. It's those people who believe that this is a country to be proud of. And if we're going to stand for anything as a conservative movement, we ought to stand for them. But we can't just stand for them by fighting the culture war as we've understood it, because the second way in which this culture war is a class war is they mean to hit us where it hurts. Now, I mentioned earlier, I lost business contacts. I lost investors when the Washington Post published what I think was a libelous claim against me. But it mattered to me. And nobody should cry about me. Nobody should tell a sad story about me. I've had a very good life, and I'm not going to complain about it. But think of the middle-class people who are affected by this culture war on traditional American values. Think, for example, about the cake baker that we all hear from Colorado, who I think is now on his third litigation pathway to the U.S. Supreme Court just for refusing to bake a cake that has messages that are against his faith. For simply refusing to put the words that he's supposed to put on a cake, they are taking him to the Supreme Court now, I believe, for the third time. That is an economic war as much as it's a culture war. Think about the ways in which to even participate in polite society, you have to say the right things. You have to talk about these issues the right way. Now, I remember even 15 years ago, the proper way to talk about sexuality and gender was you had to be respectful of gay and lesbian Americans, LG. Then it became B, bisexual, T, transgender. Now, every time you see people's profiles or Twitter accounts, it's LGBTIAQ+, which I don't even know what the hell that means. The plus is actually, the one thing I'll say to our progressive friends is thank you for adding the plus so we don't have to learn any more acronyms. My God. But think about what this actually means to a working and middle class kid living in this country. If you don't say the right things, if you don't speak the right words, then you are not welcome in polite society. You can't even work in some of our country's most elite companies unless you say the things that they want you to say. Now, I got a good friend, a friend I expected to be here tonight, but he unfortunately wasn't unable to make it. He's a brilliant political scientist, and a couple years ago he sent me a tweet from Elizabeth Warren's presidential Twitter account. And it said, "We stand with all LGBTQIA plus people plus two-spirit individuals." Now, I got to tell you, I've spent probably 15 minutes of my life trying to understand what two-spirit means. I still do not understand what it means. But I remember that because he sent me this tweet, and he said, look, and he's a gay man, he said, look, we just wanted to be left the hell alone. I don't even know what two-spirit means. Don't blame us for this. Blame the progressives. This is not my fault. But think about what this means for a kid who comes from a working or middle-class family who has not been trained how to speak the way the progressives want you to speak. I believe it was the comedian Kevin Hart, very, very funny black comedian a few years ago who lost his show. I think he was supposed to host the Oscars or the Grammys or something. He lost it. Great economic consequence to himself. The reason he lost his show is because he had said something anti-gay when he was 17 years old. Now think about what this is. It's not just you're not allowed to say these things, it's that you'll face economic consequences if you do. Who published something on Facebook after February of 2021. It was something pro-Trump and critical of the new President Biden. And he had a few of his Facebook friends who called a few of their Facebook friends, and they got 10 people to call his employer and try to get him fired. This is a middle-class guy in Middletown, Ohio. Think about what that means to that guy. To even speak his mind in his own country, in the country that his parents and grandparents built, he's going to get fired for it. Economic penalties and punishment for daring to speak about who you voted for in what is supposed to be the greatest constitutional republic in the world. The culture war is a class war. It is a class war against the people that we represent and we defend, and that's why we've got to fight it. Now, I have seen some folks in this room and in a reception earlier today walking around the halls that I respect, even though we've got in some fights in the past. So one of my dear friends is Orrin Cass. I see Orrin over there, even though the lights are really bright. Orrin, hide yourself. Orrin, I think, is a brilliant guy. He's one of the smartest thinkers about political economy in the country. I also saw earlier Richard Reinsch. Is Richard Reinsch still here? Richard, wherever you are, if you're not still here. But anyway, Richard is a guy that I've actually gotten in Twitter fights with, but I read a lot of what Richard writes, and I think he's a smart guy, and I've learned a lot from him. And my point in picking on Orrin and Richard, at least the little bit that I've done, is that I think that all of us need to appreciate what exactly we're up against, and we need to set aside debates that are important, debates that we should have, but debates that should not become definitive because we can't be fighting each other if we're actually going to win the culture war against the left. And here's the way that I'd put it. Now, my views are clearly on the table. I do not think that America's greatest and most powerful economy was built by socialism, but I also don't believe it was built by what folks often call neoliberalism or classical liberalism or whatever term you want to provide. I know those are different things, but I believe America's wealth was built by an American system, by a recognition that we needed to build our own industries, protect our own technology and industries, and that system, from Alexander Hamilton to Abraham Lincoln, Henry Clay to Teddy Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower, is part of why we're the most powerful country in the world. Now let's set those aside. I understand some of the people in this room disagree with me. I'm going to make an appeal that you should agree with my view on a lot of these topics, not because I'm going to agree with you that the American system was more important than Hayek or Bastiat or any of these important intellectuals. I'm going to make a pure, raw, cynical political claim. Because the simple fact is, the thing that we all need to represent and respect is that we have lost every single major cultural institution in this country. Except that, think about it. Big finance, big tech, Wall Street, the biggest corporations, the universities, the media, and the government. There is not a single institution in this country that conservatives currently control. But there is one of them, just one, that we might have a chance of actually controlling in the future, And that's the constitutional republic that our founders gave us. We are never going to take Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and turn them into conservative institutions. We are never going to take the universities in this country and turn them into conservative institutions. But we might, if we work hard and we make good arguments, we might just be able to control the democratic institutions in this country. And so if you don't agree with me for political economy reasons, my argument is that we need to fight woke capital, woke corporations, and the governments that enable them because we can't win anywhere else. This is a raw fact of cynical politics. If we're not willing to use the power given to us in the American constitutional republic, we are going to lose this country. And what does that mean? There are all kinds of arguments. Now there are things that we could talk about. We could talk about protective tariffs and various approaches to ensuring that we have a good and powerful economy. There's Section 230 reform to fight big tech, or even breaking up the big tech oligarchy, which is my favorite approach. There are all of these things that we could talk about to minimize the control of the most pernicious institutions in our society. But the thing that I want to talk about, the institution I want to take aim at today for the remainder of my remarks, is I want to take aim at the left, specifically the childless left, because I think the rejection of the American family is perhaps the most pernicious and most evil thing that the left has done in this country. Now let me ask you a question. I'm going to get in trouble for this. This isn't being recorded, is it? Or broadcast live? That's okay. That's all right. I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Separate Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden, the three elder Democrat politicians who have run for president before, except for Biden, may not run for president again. Consider all of the next gen of the Democrat Party. If you go on any of these prediction markets, they'll tell you who's most likely to win the Democrat nomination for president in 2024, 2028. Think about all those people. The names are obvious. They're well-known people. Kamala Harris, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who's now the Secretary of Transportation, Cory Booker, AOC. Think all these people. They're different. They come from different walks of life, different parts of the country. What is the one thing that unites every single one of them? Not a single one of them has any children. And why is that? Why have we let the Democrat Party become controlled by people who don't have children? And why is this just a normal fact of American life? That the leaders of our country should be people who don't have a personal and direct stake in it via their own offspring, via their own children and grandchildren. Now let me do the necessary throat clearing because I do think it's important. Look, a lot of people are unable to have kids for very complicated and important reasons. I know good friends of mine who have struggled to find the right girl, find the right guy. There are people, of course, for biological reasons, medical reasons, that can't have children. The target of these remarks is not them. It's important to point that out. There have always been people like that who, even though they would like to have kids, unable to have them. Let's set them to the side. It is one thing to recognize that there are people who don't have children. It's one thing to recognize that there are people who don't have children through no fault or choice of their own. But it's something else to build a political movement invested theoretically in the future of this country when not a single one of them actually has any physical commitment to the future of this country. Now, I think, unfortunately, and I'm going to take some pot shots at people who have been taking pot shots at me the last couple of weeks. It's honestly true of a lot of folks in our press and in our media. Very often I will read a story about me, or someone else will pass a story on about me. I can't read all of them because there are a lot of negative stories about J.D. Vance in the last few weeks. People seem to not like me in the liberal and the mainstream press. But very often I'll think a little bit about the people who wrote those stories. And what you find consistently is that many of the most unhappy and most miserable and most angry people in our media are childless adults. Let's just be honest about it. Because look, the elite model, the American dream to the elites is get as much credentials as you can, get as much money as you can, get the most prestigious job, and that's where you're going to find your self-worth. But I got to be honest with you, Most of our mainstream reporters are not impressive enough to find a lot of self-meaning in their jobs. They're just not good enough at it. Thank you for clapping at that. But what society has built its entire civilization, the flow of information, the leaders of its country, political and governmental, and also corporate, around completely childless adults. It's never happened. This is a new thing in American life, but I think probably a new thing in world history. It's not good. It's not healthy. You see the obsessive, weird, almost humiliating, aggressive posture of our media, and you wonder, how could these people possibly be so miserable and unhappy? Well, the answer is because they don't have any kids. Kids are the ultimate way that we find healthy people, at least I think, self-meaning in life. Whether you're in children, your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews, I'm going to go back to my two beautiful boys, my wife who loves me, and recognize that the most important thing in my life is going to be them. It will always be them. That recognition makes us healthier people. It makes us more stable people. And we should worry that in America, family formation, our birth rates, a ton of indicators of family health have collapsed. Now, my proposal today, my argument to you, is that whether you agree with my views of political economy, we should treat this as a crisis in this country. The fact that we're not having enough babies, the fact that we're not having enough children is a crisis in this country. It's a crisis because it makes our media more miserable. It's a crisis because it doesn't give our leaders enough of an investment in the future of their country. And it's a crisis because we know that babies are good. Now, I could sit here and tell you all kinds of reasons why they're good. There's a ton of economic evidence that suggests that children make economies more innovative, more productive, more geared towards the future. There's even psychological evidence that suggests that, for example, fathers of young daughters, I don't have a daughter yet, we're working on it, fathers of young daughters are more compassionate, more understanding, even that they use different words in their vocabulary when they have daughters. We are not just worried about the lack of babies because it means our media is miserable and because it means our leaders are miserable. We're worried about babies because babies are good. And a country that has children is a healthy country that's worth living in. We care about children because we're not sociopaths and we don't want to live in a society of sociopaths. Now, there are a few ideas, concrete ideas, for how we can make it easier to raise American families and support American children. Viktor Orban, who is, of course, the bugaboo of nearly every liberal in the mainstream American media, has implemented a couple of policies that I think are really interesting. One of which is that in his country, they offer loans to new married couples that are forgiven at some point later if those couples eventually stay together and have children. Why can't we do that here? Why can't we actually promote family formation here in our country? Why can't we give resources to parents who tell us the only reason they're not having kids is because they can't afford it? This is a civilizational crisis. And if we're not willing to spend resources to solve it, we're not serious about the very real problems that we face. So we should do it. We should give resources to parents who are going to have kids. We should make it easier to raise American families. And we should send the signal to the culture that we are the pro-family party and we're going to back it up with real policy. But I worry that the specific policy details, and we can debate these things, we can argue about them, but I hope we all agree that more healthy American families is a good thing. We can debate the specifics of these policies, but I worry actually that there is a structural democratic disadvantage built in to our society right now. I'll be simple and direct about it. Compare, for example, the leaders of the Democrat Party, the people who may very well be the next president of the United States. Compare their investment in this country, compare the fact that they don't have families against a middle-class Ohio family that spends a ton of resources and a ton of time educating their children, teaching them to love their country. When those kids get older, those kids will go off and fight in American wars. And when all of us reach the point that all of us will reach, they will be the ones who take care of us in old age. That's not something you can buy if you don't have people. These children are the future of this country. And yet, the parents who have them actually have no advantage in our democratic process. They have a smaller voice in some ways, in very many cases, than the people who don't have any children at all. The children who come from these families have no real representative in our democracy. Why don't we change that? Now, some people will say this is radical and this is crazy. The Democrats are talking about giving the vote to 16-year-olds, but let's do this instead. Let's give votes to all children in this country, but let's give control over those votes to the parents of those children. When you go to the polls in this country as a parent, you should have more power, you should have more of an ability to speak your voice in our democratic republic than people who don't have kids. Let's face the consequences and the reality. If you don't have as much of an investment in the future of this country, maybe you shouldn't get nearly the same voice. Now, people will say, and I'm sure the Atlantic and the Washington Post and all the usual suspects will criticize me about this in the coming days. Well, doesn't this mean that non-parents don't have as much of a voice as parents? Doesn't this mean that parents get a bigger say in how our democracy functions? Yes, absolutely. So let's do it. Let's push better public policy, but let's also make this a pro-family country, not just in the way that we vote, not just in the policies that we enact, but in the very structure of our country. I'm sure there are a whole lot of ideas out there. I'm sure that there are other things that people might suggest, but this, to me, is the purpose of the conservative movement. Whether it's immigration or crime, election integrity, everything that we care about traces to this fundamental fact: we want people who work hard and play by the rules to be able to live a good life in this country. That's what it's all about. That's what we stand for. Now, I know I speak to a lot of college students or a lot of folks who are involved in college education programs, and so I want to close out with just a couple of thoughts along those lines. First of all, I admire you. I admire you for being conservative and being willing to fight for your principles at a time when the social and economic costs of being a conservative are great. But I want to remind you, it's not just courage that this is about. I don't just respect you. I need you. We all need you. This room, this country needs you. I'm going to tell you a little story about a woman that I think a lot about. She's actually from a town not too far from where I grew up in southwestern Ohio. And she came up to me at a political event, and I tried not to choke up just because she's a very sweet woman. It reminded me a lot of my grandma. She's a woman who's taking care of her baby grandson. And she's taking care of her grandson because her daughter was taken by a heroin addiction and heroin overdose. And I think about this woman. Her husband's dead. She lives on a single fixed income. She was not expecting to have to take care of a grandbaby, both emotionally and financially, but she does it. She does it because it's the right thing. Now, her number one issue, the thing she cares most about in the world, is the immigration crisis. The reason she cares about it is very simple. Now, the left will tell you that she cares about the immigration crisis because she doesn't like brown people, because she doesn't like Mexicans. She cares about the immigration crisis for much simpler and much better reasons. That she doesn't want the same poison that took her daughter from her to take her grandbaby from her. That's why she cares about the immigration crisis. That's why she is a conservative, because she wants a strong southern border to protect her grandbaby, the grandbaby that no one else is looking out for but her. We talk so much about freedom, about limited government and big government. We talk so much about social conservatism and all these important things that I believe in. I can debate, I can disagree with, but they're all abstractions. This is about real people. Ladies and gentlemen, this movement should stand for that grandma and that grandbaby in Lebanon, Ohio, who cares enough about her child, her grandchild, to take care of them. This movement is not just about courage for courage's sake. It's about courage for the people who built this country and will continue to build it in the future. So thank you. Thank you for caring about this country enough to fight for it, and let's keep going. God bless you.
3 questions.
Sounds good. Yeah. So we're going to do, Johnny said we'll do 3 questions. Have you already asked the questions? Or got them? Okay.
You can ask the questions through the ISI app. That is the only way that we'll be taking questions for this session. I will be posing the first one now from Jonah in the app.
Okay.
JD, what message do you have for those of us who grew up on the other side of the tracks just like you, amidst a changing political culture where the newest and greatest idea is to, quote, stand up for the working class Americans who shouldn't have ended up as statistics? What do you have to say about those who are disingenuously echoing that sentiment, and they might have grown up with silver spoons in their mouth and they're trying to claim the mantle of the working class just because it's popular?
Well, I guess my advice that I'd offer to that person is, look, it's very hard to support any group of people unless you actually spend some time with them. So one, if there are a lot of fake false prophets who don't spend an ounce of time with the people they're actually trying to help, you should mistrust them. But 2, the thing that I hate about our meritocracy is that it takes kids like me, it takes kids who come from rough backgrounds, it sucks them into these elite universities, it teaches them to hate where they came from, and then it puts them in like one of 5 cities to have any chance at a life that, at an income that will justify the hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt that they have. And so my advice and my request to anybody who really cares about the working class is to move to one place, whether it's a big city or a small town that's not in one of our big 5 metro areas, to get married and start a family. Those are the most important things you can do, and that's what will actually connect you and anchor you to the people you're trying to help.
The second question is from Christian. How specific do you think the conservative moral vision has to be to succeed in the political sphere? Is it enough to merely reject woke politics? Do our leaders need to have some understanding of natural law? What about religion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it needs to have a specific vision. Look, there are going to be disagreements. There are always going to be disagreements. But I don't think our philosophy can just be a rejection of the left. We have to offer something in response. I mean, one of my favorite political sayings is that a lame horse is going to be no horse every single time. We actually have to have a horse here. We have to provide, what is our vision of this country? What do we want it to look like? What happens to the people, whether they're young or old, who do the right things? What does their life look like in our country? And I don't think you can do that unless you have a very specific moral vision. Again, there are going to be disagreements, but we have to actually provide an alternative. You can't just be anti-left in this country. It might mean you get some political wins, but I don't think long term it's going to lead you to anywhere any of us want to go.
Great. And the final question for JD is from Robert. Shifting gears a little bit, many in this room will never work in the private sector. They work here in Washington. What have you learned from working in venture capital that can be applied to government?
Well, I think that one thing I've learned from venture capital is that the universities in this country are not super good at training people to think for themselves. That's an understatement. They're terrible at teaching people to think for themselves. And I think one thing that is valuable in government is experience and intelligence, courage. But one thing that's not super valuable is credentials. And I think our entire society has gotten really obsessed with, if you get a nice fancy degree on your wall, and there's nothing wrong with it, I've got one too, but that gives you a certain legitimacy and a certain ability to do things. And this is something that you can take from venture capital to almost any industry. One of the people I've worked with, had the privilege of working with, served in the Air Force, incredibly smart person, did not graduate from college. But the reason I love working with this person is because she's smart and she's courageous and she doesn't take a lot of BS. Colleges almost select these days for people who pull their hair out over every little thing. They have no real courage, but more than that, they have no emotional reserve to deal with challenging circumstances. Look, college degree at this point is the currency of the elite. It's very hard to get into some of these circles unless you've got one. So I understand why people still go and get college degrees. But we've got to get to a society where we respect actual ability more than we respect the paper that hangs on somebody's wall, especially given that And that's especially true because the institutions that are granting and giving those paper degrees on the wall are increasingly corrupt and hostile to everything that we care about. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, JD. Awesome. Home run, man.